in this episode of the Critical Oxygen Podcast.
So kind of in the most traditional sense, running economy is just how much oxygen or energy that you're consuming for a given speed or work rate. That's all it is. Efficiency, more broadly, would be how much or what the ratio between mechanical energy output is to metabolic energy input.
Welcome to the Critical Oxygen Podcast, where we help you optimize your physiology and maximize your endurance potential. I'm your host, Phil Batterson. I have a PhD in molecular exercise physiology, and I'm the founder of Critical Oxygen, where my mission is to build better endurance athletes through remote education and in-person physiological testing. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Shalaya Kipp. Shalaya earned her PhD from the University of British Columbia in the field of kinesiology, where her research focused on breathing mechanics during exercise with a specific interest in sex differences in aging. Prior to her doctoral studies, Shalaya completed her master's degree in integrative physiology from the University of Colorado Boulder, where she focused on the biomechanics and energetics of human running, including the initial studies on Nike's 4% Vaporfly Super Shoe. We really dig into this, so I'm super excited, to share this sort of conversation with somebody who is kind of on the initial cutting edge of this research. Shalaya has a background as a competitive runner, and she specialized in the 3,000-meter steeplechase. She is an NCAA champion and 9-time All-American. Shalaya has represented the United States at the World Championships and the Olympic Games in 2012. Currently, Shalaya enjoys stroller runs with her 9-month-old daughter and 2.5-year-old son. In today's episode, Shalaya and I talk all things exercise economy and efficiency, along with breathing mechanics and the oxygen cost of breathing. Economy of movement is one of the 3 main predictors of endurance performance, but is probably a lesser known variable in terms of actually being able to be measured because it requires indirect calorimetry to actually quantify it. For those that don't know, economy is the amount of oxygen or energy that you use for a given exercise intensity, whether that is running or cycling. Efficiency, on the other hand, is slightly different as a measure of your internal to external energy expenditure is typically reported as a percentage. We also talked about the mechanics of breathing. I felt this was really fitting to get a researcher's perspective on the podcast to discuss this because breathing has really come to the forefront of endurance performance with a lot of books being written about it, a lot of companies coming up with breathing apparatuses, and I just wanted to get her expert opinion on breathing mechanics, maybe how we can change that, how we can train those things, and all of that. So Shalaya and I really discussed the differences in breathing mechanics between running and cycling and between males and females. This was a super interesting conversation, and you can tell Shalaya is super energetic and really awesome to talk to. So without further ado, please enjoy my talk with Dr. Shalaya Kipp. Dr. Shalaya Kipp, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is I'm always looking for people that I want to get on the show and stuff like that. And I think our first interactions kind of happened when I was posting some stuff. And were you asking about sex differences? Is that
somebody tagged me in one of your
it might have been me, honestly.
I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And yeah, and then I started following. Yeah. So I'm always looking for people who have the background and stuff. And I didn't say this offline, but I will say this online. You are the first Olympian that I've had on the show. So congratulations to that. That's awesome. But I did also tell you that we are more interested in the Dr. Shalaya Kipp side of things because you also have a PhD. Is it in biomechanics? It's in kinesiology. Yeah.
Okay.
So respiratory mechanics would be fair.
Okay, yeah. And then you did your master's degree was a lot of the biomechanics work, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we're gonna get a little mixture of both. I love the idea of, how did you apply what you were learning to your athletics, and then how did you take what you were learning from your athletics and apply that to, your research and stuff? Because I think for a lot of us, at least, there's a big tie between the two. So if you wouldn't mind just starting with just a brief introduction. It doesn't even have to be brief, just an introduction. What got you into athletics? What drove you then to research? And what are you doing now?
Yeah, sure. So like you said, I'm Shalaya Kipp. I have a background as a distance runner. My specialty was the 3,000 meter steeplechase.
during the time that I was doing steeplechase at the University of Colorado, I got interested in my own self and my own physiology, and I joined the exercise physiology lab. I got super into it, and then I started researching biomechanics and biomechanics of the steeplechase. I have a lot of interest in ground reaction forces and what actually happens to the body when someone jumps.
And especially jumping over those large barriers.
Large barriers. It exerts a lot of force on the body.
Yeah. I was telling my fiance, I was like, oh, do you know what the steeplechase is? I'm so excited. I get to, like interview this woman who is an Olympian in the steeplechase. She's like, oh, is that where they hand off the baton and stuff? And I was like, no. That's a relay race.
It's the one that they show when somebody falls on the water jump and eats it. That's whenever it gets put on TV.
They do the scorpion, right? Where their feet touch the back of their head.
Yeah. 12-foot pit deep of water. So it's pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, no, it's so I told her, I was like, it's a barrier that's not moving. And think about like the ground reaction forces, right? You're jumping as hard as you can. If you run into that, I've known people who have like broken their feet, done other things like that, where it's like so it's not contact because you're not supposed to hit the other competitors, but it is contact from the fact that you could be hitting those barriers.
It is. So you know what a ground reaction force is, right? It's the force that the ground is exerting up on you and you're exerting back on the ground.
Yep.
During normal running, it's about 2 to 3 times your body weight. What do you think it is when a steeplechaser goes off the water jump and lands? How many times body weight?
When they're landing, it's probably closer to, we'll say 5.
It's up to 7 times their body weight.
Okay, I was close, but 7. That's like that. Yeah. That's a lot. And most of the time you're getting you're putting your foot on top of the barrier.
And then pushing off and landing.
Yeah, so you're getting even higher. So is it 12 feet from the top of the steeple to...
Oh, it's 12 foot long.
Oh, gotcha. I was like, 12 foot, that seems like a really long fall. Okay, 12 foot long, but still 7 times your body weight. Right? And people, like I always, like, this is what it made me think of, the posters that people are like, this is what hypertrophy looks like, and they put a sprinter, and then they say, this is what, like endurance looks like, and they put this like sickly looking endurance runner. It's like, no. You got to be really damn strong to support 7 times your body weight when you're jumping over these barriers and stuff. So get that out. I'm sure the people who are listening to this podcast, appreciate how strong you actually have to be to run this sort of stuff. But it's very surprising sometimes to hear that.
Yeah, it is. When you think there's 28 jumps per event. So it's a lot. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, that was a short way of saying I was a steeplechaser, got interested in myself, found an advisor that wanted to do science on weird track and field events. And then I became kind of hooked.
Cool. Yeah. And it was when you were doing your master, well, you ran at CU Boulder, which is, arguably one of the most, competitive, best developmental programs probably in the nation for, cross country and long track and field events. Was there anything that you particularly like learned during your masters that you like just took and started to apply to your actual racing or your training or anything like that?
So anyone that knows CU Boulder knows it's coached by Mark Wetmore and Heather Burrows. I knew never to question them. I think I started understanding why they were doing what they were doing. Cool. And I was very much like, I am not questioning. They get what I'm doing and why. And it was like, yes, we're doing everything right.
Yes.
So I didn't change anything. I just was more like, I'm going to listen to you.
Yeah. That was actually, I was the opposite. Like during my high school career, because I was a cross country runner and a track runner, never amazing or anything like that, but knew enough and was fast enough to be like, okay, like top 5 in the conference and like other things like that. But that was my number one question to my coaches is why? Why are we doing this? Why are we running, 40 by 400 meters 2 days before the state race? Why are we doing this sort of stuff? And now I know it's like, well, they didn't really know what the heck they were doing. They were just kind of like, oh, well, this is what we used to do back in the day, so we're going to do it now. But that's what got me interested is I wanted to know the why behind what we were doing, because I think if you start to understand the why, then you can start to play with the variables a little bit better, right? You can say, okay, well, do we really have to do 5x5 for a VO2 max workout, or can we tweak it a little bit and do something slightly different, right? And it gives you the pliability and the flexibility, but you wouldn't know that if you just read like, this is the protocol that you have to do to develop VO2 max and other things like that. You don't know the why behind it.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So you got into the biomechanics of stuff, and admittedly, I'm more on the molecular physiology side of things. I took one biomechanics class, and it was more like biomechanics of like musculoskeletal injury, and they showed. So I do have a mechanical engineering degree, so I do kind of understand, like loading forces and other things like that. Yeah. But like the professor, like the first day showed, like shear forces and, all of like elastic modulus of strain and like other things like that. And I was like, okay, like I get this, I could do it. But I looked over at like my friends who like had to have no background in this. They were just like, oh my gosh, like this is going to be awful. And then we never talked about it again, which was great. But it was one of those things where it's like, it is amazing the amount of like, say, engineering knowledge that is actually required to understand like biomechanics of loading and other things like that. And then if we start to think about, biomechanics and other things like that, it's like, okay, well, how can we change that to become more efficient in our movement to then expend less energy and become better athletes? So I imagine, right, this kind of, or you were working in the lab at the time when they were looking at the the Vaporfly 4%?
So this was the next thing I was going to tell you. You said,
yes,
is there
perfect.
anything else you would have applied to it? Well, there was one thing I learned. I got really interested in running economy. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about kind of those three main variables that predict endurance performance, we think of VO2 max, lactate threshold, or whatever kind of threshold you want to call it.
Second threshold, that's what I've been trying to get back.
Yeah. The supposed, well, that's a different can of worms, not for today.
I know. And,
yeah, and economy. And something that's really interesting about economy is it's the only variable that can be changed with technology. So, in an acute sort of sense. So I can put it on and it improves this variable. And specifically, we started looking at running shoes. My advisor was on the Nike research board, and Nike came to him and said, hey, we got this really cool prototype shoe. Would you test it for us? Mm-hmm. And so they sent this really ugly prototype to our lab. And I want to make clear that it was a very ugly prototype. And super shoes, the term super shoes didn't even exist yet. Because people are like, no, people knew it was a super shoe. They put it on. Of course they ran faster. No, it was an ugly prototype shoe, and super shoes didn't exist. But we found 18 men that could run a sub 31 10K and were a size 10 shoe to test it for us. So yeah, you could only do this in Boulder, Colorado, where that kind of population exists.
I was going to say 31-minute 10K is fast to begin with, and finding, what'd you say, 30 people that could do it?
No, 18 people that could do it. But we're a shoe size 10 because that was the size we had for the prototype. It was like searching for Cinderella, right? Like, does the shoe fit? Yeah, does the shoe fit? But the incredible thing was when we put this prototype shoe on everyone's economy improved. It was on a magnitude from anywhere from 2 to 6%, which is huge. So the average being a 4% improvement in running economy.
Yeah. Imagine, right? Like I talk about predictors of performance all the time because that was kind of what my master's was in. And I actually did my master's like just down the road from CU Boulder at University of Colorado Springs. Exactly. Yeah. So small world. I don't think we were there around the same time, but kind of going in and out. I would have
gone down to Air Force and raced every now and then, so maybe.
Yeah. I never went up to Air Force, but I did work like very briefly at the Olympic Training Center under Lindsay Golick, and she gave me some really cool, pointers and stuff on exercise physiology testing and all of that. It was sweet.
They used to make me drive down there from Boulder to get blood work done, and I was so upset about it because I would drive down fasted every morning without coffee. Oh. It was like the worst drive.
Just so you're just like the grumpiest driver. Just
I was like, and then they're like, you can get blood work done in Boulder. I was like, yeah, I can.
Yeah, you're like, just let me do the testing here. Come on. But yeah, okay, so 2 to 6%. If we think about that, that obviously just economy isn't going to equate to 2 to 6% improvement in performance, but
very key point.
Yeah, but that is an insane amount, right? That's like, this might be a weird question, but do you know how much people's VO2 max improves with things like EPO ingestion and blood doping per se?
It probably depends on what their baseline VO2 is. So
okay,
I'm not
yeah,
sure what the
and what their baseline hemoglobin levels are and other things like that, right?
Yeah, but to put it into context, when Adidas came out with their Boost foam and found like a 1.5% improvement, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
So Adidas finding a 1.5%, and now Nike found a 4%. And that's kind of the best way I can equate how big 4% is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, and I remember hearing too, people are like, oh, I don't know if we should let these shoes be, like running because, you're just going to engineer these like freaking stilts and other things like that. And I know there are rules in effect now that limit super shoes from going into, like they can't be used if X, Y, and Z. But you're on the cutting edge of figuring out this super shoe thing. When you were collecting that data, were you like, this seems a bit high, or did we calibrate this correctly? Like, because that's what my first question would be, is like, this seems almost too good to be true. 2 to 6% in every single person. It's like, normally you have responders, non-responders, and kind of like middle of the road. Or
so
super
the other thing was we were testing the Adidas shoe to the Nike Streak. So those would have been your kind of other two top marathon shoes. And those ones were kind of middle of the road. And so since our results said, hey, these shoes are about what we'd expect, and this one's different, we had no reason to think there was something, systematically wrong with our equipment.
Okay, yeah.
So in the lab, we could start calling it the magic shoe.
Okay.
I mean, it was ended up being named the Vaporfly, but into my head, it's still the magic.
Yeah. You're like this because it really is
like
that
magic. We put it on every single man, and their running economy was better.
Yeah, and then were you like, hey Nike, do you have any women's size shoes that I can wear?
So this is something I feel like I was probably too naive in my master's. They definitely had a prototype women's shoe. We know Shalane Flanagan ran them in the trials. Amy Craig. I don't know why we didn't ask to test women too. And I was too naive during my master's to be like, hey, could we get a women's prototype?
Yeah. I hear.
That's something I probably would ask now.
Now you're like, oh, son of a gun, we need it. And I think this is another thing that you and I might have discussed, or I've definitely discussed with other people who are interested, but like sex differences in physiology and predictors of performance, because there is a paucity of data on women and how they adapt to endurance training and other things like that, and we need to do it. Like, we need more of that now, right?
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
The good news is with the shoes, people have tested them in women, and it looks like the magnitude is the same. So
yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So you were doing this testing, and you were probably getting interested. You're like, okay, well, economy and everything like that. We keep throwing this economy thing around. We haven't even defined it yet. So could you define economy? And then this is actually where you and I think had a little bit of a back and forth, was economy and efficiency.
We did have
so let's get a definition for both, and then I can be better at giving a definition, and I can stay consistent with my sort of stuff. So what is running economy? What is exercise efficiency? How do they differ, and how do we measure them?
Sure. So kind of in the most traditional sense, running economy is just how much oxygen or energy that you're consuming for a given speed or work rate. That's all it is. Efficiency, more broadly, would be how much or what the ratio between mechanical energy output is to metabolic energy input. So for both economy and efficiency, you could put it into energy consumption terms. You can express both in joules. Most commonly, you do see economy as oxygen. I think that's just from a historical standpoint, people understand that number better. And then efficiency, since it's a ratio multiplied by 100, we always see it as a percentage.
Yep.
We're on this. We agree so far?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Your next part of your question was, how do we measure it?
Yes. Or what is so maybe the differentiation between the two, which I actually know we already got to. So I will say that because you are measuring internal to external for efficiency values, you have to convert those energy expenditures into something that is similar.
It always must be a joule or a watt, correct?
Yes, exactly. So it has to be either in watts or in joules, and watts is joules per second, right? So they're very similar, slightly different, but the only way to actually get joules of internal work done is by measuring oxygen consumption and CO2. So next thing is, yes, how do we measure them?
Sure. So we would use indirect calorimetry. That's when you see someone on a bike, on a treadmill, and they have that fun, beautiful face mask on and a nose clip. And you're measuring the amount of oxygen they've consumed and the amount of carbon dioxide they've produced. The ratio of those two is going to be your RER. So higher RER, you're producing more CO2 to oxygen consumed. And that lets you know approximately what substrate is being oxidized.
And does it matter in terms of, if you're measuring economy or efficiency, if your RER is closer to that 0.7 or closer to that 1.0, which would indicate, full fat oxidation versus carbohydrates? Or can you, as long as you're getting something that is within that 0.7 to 1.0, does it really not matter what intensity you're at?
No, it would matter slightly. So
okay.
That's why it would be more appropriate for us to always be reporting economy as joules per kilogram per,
Right. And that's some of the papers that you actually wrote, is like, because the equations change based on the CO2 that's being produced, you actually have to take into account both oxygen and CO2 consumption.
Yeah. So if I'm consuming 1 liter of oxygen, if I'm oxidizing fats, I'm going to get less energy for that 1 liter than if I was to oxidize completely carbohydrates. So I'd get more energy for that same liter of oxygen. All I tell you is 1 liter of oxygen, but the joule output's going to look something more like 21 joules when it's all carbs, or 19 joules if it's all fats.
Okay.
Mainly fats. Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah.
It is
okay.
Slightly different. Yeah.
Yeah. That is. Yeah. No. That is super interesting. And it's something that it's like, don't necessarily think about. And then here's a methodological consideration or question for you is, when I was doing my master's, we would do like, delta efficiency. Like so many different measurements of efficiency.
Gross efficiency, net efficiency, all these, yeah.
Yeah, all of that. We would try to measure all of them. But what we were doing is we were actually measuring efficiency at lower exercise intensities, because it seemed at the time like by measuring at the low intensities, you were actually able to still predict performance, or at least, get some surrogate of performance. Now, though, what I think is that by measuring closer to the race pace or the output that you're trying to actually predict, you would probably get a stronger correlation between economy and performance if that were the case.
I think you're totally right. And I don't know if this is in the literature, but people's economy looks better at the pace they train. But if what's really important is to measure economy at the pace, or the closest pace you can get to, that they are going to race at. So I agree with you there. And there is something about it. It is kind of scoopy. There is a nice little median there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting, because, then if you start thinking about like the Breaking 2 project and, like the running economy that was required, I think there's like a paper that kind of looked under the hood.
Yeah, they looked at it at 21 kilometers per hour, which is probably as good as they could get. Yeah.
Right. That's fast. That's really, really fast. And I think too, like, they definitely had some people who couldn't even maintain that 21 kilometers per hour for however long they were asking them to run. So they're like, yep, you're not going to be able to run the 2-hour marathon. Like,
that has to be like what, a 4:45 mile or something pace? Like, that's crazy fast.
Yeah, I don't know, but yes, that is for any of, like, I was an okay runner. Like I said, my fastest mile ever was like 4:41. These individuals who are running the marathon, like especially like the males who are running like really close to 2 hours, they're like 4:36 or something like that.
Yes.
For their race pace for 26.2 miles. So I did it for 1 mile. My face was like I was like tunnel vision going down the last stretch. I like collapsed at the finish line, and they just do it for another 25.2 times, after
it's
I did
mind-boggling.
it. Yeah. It's, that's what fascinates me about, like elite endurance performance, is just like how, or just elite performance in general, is how different one person's physiology can be, even to somebody who's, like, okay and, pretty athletic.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, it's really cool. And it's always fun too, to study like the highest, like the elites of the elites, to know what's actually possible. Yeah, it just blows my mind.
Yes.
So okay.
I agree.
Yeah. So then I guess the follow up to that is okay, we figured out how to measure exercise economy, and we figured out or efficiency and economy. Your recommendation is let's most likely use kilojoules because the rate, the RER as it's changing is going to yield different energy outputs.
Is going to change how much energy.
Which is a really important distinction for people. And then I think like maybe the last thing would be, okay, well, how, like, if I don't have access to, a metabolic cart or something like that, because it's expensive tests, right? Is there a way of estimating your economy or getting an idea of your economy without the testing equipment?
Yeah, it's not perfect. Probably the best thing you could use is heart rate.
Okay.
And that's going to change on a day-to-day basis. But what I would say is, if you wanted to do it on a single day, it might be okay. If someone was really interested in testing like economy and shoes on themselves, looking at it within day and trying to use heart rate to figure out, hey, my heart rate's lower when I wear these shoes, they might get kind of close, especially if the magnitude's going to be something like 4%. Heart rate might work for them. Okay.
That's cool. Yeah. So the key there would be don't accumulate too much fatigue because that's going to raise your heart rate.
Don't do it too many times. Yeah.
Yep.
Do it within a day.
Don't do it too many times. Make sure it's done within the day, same conditions and everything like that. I guess that a follow-up question to that, did you ever test people's economy like multiple days in a row? And if so, was there like coefficient of variation within like the economy measures, or is it actually pretty stable for runners?
We did do a coefficient of variation. We had another control shoe, and I can't remember what that is.
Okay.
It actually isn't a huge swing.
Okay.
That's what I can kind of remember. And testing myself enough, I know it's not like this. It's kind of like, it's almost like VO2 max a bit. It's pretty stable. You might see some, fluctuation, but
not a terrible
training's definitely going to be the bigger one than day to day. So.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Okay, so we're kind of up to your master's stuff. Was there anything else that you learned during your master's degree that kind of like then stemmed or spurred your interest then in where we're going with next, which is like breathing mechanics?
So I had one more thing for you.
Yeah.
And it's why do we use both efficiency and economy?
Perfect.
Right? Because I know you talk a lot about efficiency with cyclists, and we talk about running economy with runners. And I kind of wanted to say there's some specific reasons we do that. One, we already talked about efficiency being the ratio between that mechanical energy output to metabolic energy input. Mechanical energy is really hard to measure in a runner. And even if you can measure it, it really doesn't make sense to measure it. So during running, we're both producing forces and the body's absorbing forces. So energy can kind of be recycled in that manner. And so if during running, that elastic energy is being stored in the tendons and other elastic tissues, during the braking phase, and then returned during the propulsive phase, we get a real metabolic benefit to that energy recycling. And so it's not a very constrained system. So measuring that mechanical energy output doesn't really correlate with the metabolic input. So for running, even if you can measure mechanical output, efficiency is kind of meaningless. Whereas in cycling, it's actually really strongly correlated. So efficiency is a very useful measure for a cyclist.
Yeah. One of the challenges, or one of the things with cycling efficiency, though, is that it's not very different between individuals, at least at lower exercise intensities. Like I think the variation is like 18 to 22% or something like that at like low power outputs. So, but I am sure, like we were talking about earlier, if an individual was racing at like race pace, or like, we'll just say like, some of the Tour de France athletes, right? They can maintain 400 watts all day, every day. I can guarantee you my efficiency values would be absolute garbage compared to theirs, because I can't even ride for 400 watts for like a minute or two. So I think that, again, that's kind of like where my brain goes, is like, okay, well, where, or, like what's going to give us the biggest delineation in terms of, like the populations and stuff, and how could we potentially change it, right?
Yeah. But I'm saying there's a certain reason we say running economy and not running efficiency.
Oh, right. Because, and
running efficiency actually isn't useful. It really needs to be an economy measure.
Yeah. So it needs to be a, like an oxygen use or oxygen or energy use per speed in this case, because the speed is the output that we're looking at.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't convert speed to kilojoules. So, there's that. Okay. No, that is a really good, differentiation. And with cycling, right, you can measure power, and power is meaningful, in cycling.
Yeah.
But what about, like people listening to the show probably think like, well, what about like the Stride power meter? That measures your power output, but like you said, we have a cyclical system that's storing energy, returning energy, other things like that. But my question then would be, wouldn't that be reflected in the actual efficiency values? Wouldn't those efficiency values be higher if you're actually returning more? Like if your spring is I don't want to say stiffer or weaker, but if you're storing more energy and able to release that better.
I think it's going to change too much on each speed that it doesn't really correlate as well as we'd like.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because I do have coaches who are like, yeah, it's like the power meters and stuff for running are cool, but I just don't see the uses of them yet, just because especially when you're running outside, even little undulations, like, changing your cadence and your pace.
Unless you're on the track. Yeah, I don't know.
Even on the track, it's really, really hard. I was doing some testing and trying to maintain like a certain pace on the track. And my power was just out. It was awful. And granted, like I hadn't been practicing my pacing very, very well. But then when I got on a treadmill, it's like very consistently like, okay, it's 200 at this pace. And then if you go up, a certain amount, then it's like 10 watts higher. So I think, maybe from that perspective, maybe that, could be a little bit of an area for people to look into if they are still doing research. I'm not currently doing, my own independent research or anything like that. But just ideas for people, if they're
Someone
still interested
out there might
in that.
take it.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why you got to put it out there, because then, and I'm sure people are already, probably looking at it and stuff. Okay, so we've gotten to the point of economy. Is there anything else you want to add on to that?
I can't think of anything.
Okay, if anything else comes up, you can just
know.
Yeah. So then you decided to do a PhD. Was this after your running career was done, or were you still running while you were pursuing your PhD?
I ran up like literally until I left.
Okay.
And then I actually did still race kind of the first few years of my PhD. And then things are really crazy.
PhDs are like really busy and stressful. So.
Yeah, I know, right? And then I decided to have a baby during my PhD too. So I was
gosh.
Wait a second, like we need to back off somewhere.
So we got to reduce the stress somewhere, or else everything's going to fall apart, right?
So no, I kind of decided, hey, whatever running is going to be, I'm ready to start a PhD. And so my husband and I both moved up to Vancouver, Canada, British Columbia, and started our PhDs up there. And I decided to take a complete 90-degree turn and look at breathing.
Okay. Yeah. So what got you interested in breathing? Because I know for me, I got interested in the mitochondrial side of things during my master's, because I was like, this applied stuff is awesome. But I wanted to know why and how was our body adapting to get to that amazing physiology. Yep. So that's why I pursued more of the molecular side of things.
I thought breathing would answer all the questions. No, actually I was still interested in economy. I really am interested in this idea that economy is not linear when you look at it over a huge range of running speeds. Mm-hmm. So most of the time we draw it as a straight line, but it is slightly curved when you look kind of at the upper end, or if you get a subject that can run a bunch of different speeds. Mm-hmm. Normally, if you look at kind of an untrained person, it's like 3 or 4 data points and it looks really straight.
Right. But what you were saying is there's kind of like the valley effect, right?
Yeah. And I thought one of the reasons might be when you start getting to faster speeds, there's more turbulent flow when you breathe in, and that would actually reduce economy. And so economy actually led me to breathing.
Interesting. And I've had a lot of people kind of on the show that, like breathing seems to be the big thing right now.
Like you got to do it all day long.
I know. And it's one of the things that we can actually influence, right, by consciously being able to do it.
Breathing's weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's different from other physiological systems that are reacting to what's going on in our life, whereas we can consciously control our breath, which then has some influence on then the physiological state that we're actually in, right?
And as researchers, you have to make sure you don't prime or kind of mess up your subjects. I don't even want them to know when I'm actually doing a data collection. Like I'll collect like 30 seconds of data and I'll pretend to just not be paying attention to them to make sure I'm getting really natural breathing. Yeah.
Oh, that's super interesting because I mean, that's like very like, like kind of like the psychologist like take on stuff, right?
Well, you can imagine if I'm like 1, 2, 3, collect, someone's like, and it's going to mess them up. So yeah. I pretend to be really distracted. And so I'm like, and I'm like, oh, look outside.
Yeah.
Like not paying attention. So.
Yeah. Because then they're not thinking about it, right? And no,
that's what I want to know.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of the like RMRs and stuff, and like practicing resting metabolic rate tests and all of that. And if you over breathe, you can mess up the data so quickly.
Yeah.
So it is one of those things where you do want somebody who not consciously controlling their breath, because when you are consciously controlling it, you can change a lot of variables really, really easily. So okay, so you were thinking turbulent flow,
well,
right?
So I thought ventilation was really interesting, and I'm like, hey, I bet this has some effects, and so that is kind of where that led me.
Yeah. So okay, so then during your PhD, what questions were you asking, and what sort of answers were you finding? Was it the turbulent flow messing up running economy, or
I've never gotten to answer that question actually, so. Well, I still don't actually know why that relationship's slightly curvilinear. So
okay,
if someone wants to go answer that, you would make me really happy.
Yeah. Why? So the relationship between efficiency and intensity seems to be curvilinear. Like it bottoms out where you run the most, and then it kind of just has an acceleration where you get less and less efficient as you get faster and faster.
Yeah, in this non-linear sense.
Yep.
And I would say if you look at economy and a cyclist, you don't see that. So there is something also going on with running. I did look at differences in breathing between running and cycling. So I can tell you a little bit about that. But exactly what creates that shape, I don't know. Yeah,
that's super interesting. It's like whenever you're trying to answer one question, that begets more questions. Yep. And that's how people can make careers out of research, right?
I tried to answer one question. Instead, I came up with 10 others and answered a few over there. Like,
also true, right?
Yeah.
That is, I'm laughing because there's just so many parallels to, I think everybody's struggle, right? It's like you have a question that you think you know the answer to, and then it yields something totally different, and you're like, okay, well, let's look at that for now. Yeah, exactly. And then all of a sudden your plan's out the window and you just like followed, some other branching path that's just like, oh, and we're here. Okay, cool. So yeah, if you don't mind diving into differences in breathing patterns between cyclists and runners, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I'll start with what I was doing up there. So I came from a biomechanics background. Mm-hmm. My PhD supervisor had bought a motion capture system and didn't know how to use it. And then this girl with a biomechanics background reaches out and is like, hey, I'm interested in breathing. Like, could we chat? And he's like, this could be a really great fit. Would you be interested in respiratory mechanics? And I said, sure. So normally you see pictures of people taking reflective markers and putting it on the lower limbs, on the legs, those shiny little balls on people's legs. Instead, I put those all over people's torsos. So cool. I had 89 reflective markers. I put those on the torsos. And what that would allow me to do is create a 3-dimensional model of how the chest wall moves in real time. Mm-hmm. And within that model, I would calculate the volume inside of it. Mm-hmm. And I could break it down into the volume of the rib cage and the volume of the abdomen. So I could say, if your tidal breath is, 2 liters, 1.25 is coming from the rib cage and that other bit is coming from the abdomen.
Cool.
So I could kind of tell you which muscles are generating it.
Yeah.
I forgot why I'm telling you all this.
You're telling me this.
Running.
No. Yes, we're getting to the running and the cycling, but no, this is super interesting because all of these, this is great because now we're taking, like the nonlinear path. So then my follow-up would be, okay, so if, actually, I'm going to let you go with like the running and the cycling thing. So you're determining what's coming from the rib cage expansion and what's coming from abdominal, or I guess actually for the listeners and for myself, because I'm interested, if you're contracting muscles like your intercostals and the ones in your ribs, A, what are all those muscles that are being contracted? And then B, in terms of like the abdomen, is it more the diaphragm, like diaphragm dominant, and how does that change?
Okay, so first I'm going to start with a fun question for you. How many muscles do you think aid in respiration?
Oh my gosh.
And not like your cellular kind of respiration, in breathing.
Yeah.
How many muscles of respiration are there?
So admittedly, anatomy was not my biggest strength during my. I'm a physiologist through and through.
Anyone out there listening can think of a number in their head right now.
Yeah, we'll pause for a second. I'm gonna say 20.
20. Okay, so what if I told you it's upwards of 60 muscles? So there's a lot of moving pieces there.
Yeah. So what you're telling me is that one muscle is not dictating all of breathing.
Like we think of the diaphragm as our primary flow generator, and it really is, but there is a lot of other accessory muscles helping us breathe, especially during exercise, and that's the key part.
Okay.
Expiration is passive during rest, but it is not passive during exercise. So during exercise, I will actively contract my abdomen to exhale all that air out.
And then too, so there's obviously, so if there's, did you say 60 just respiratory muscles? So that could be both inspiratory and expiratory?
Probably have more than one function. There's a lot of postural muscles in there. A lot in the palate as well will help us with breathing. So they have other functional roles, accessory muscles. Yeah.
I did a little bit of breath training with like very high breathing frequencies. And it was amazing how like tight my jaw, my throat, other things like that actually got towards the end of like the practice and stuff.
That you forget. Yeah.
It's wild. So, okay. Lots of muscles that are involved in the coordination of breathing.
Yep.
And then
but I want you to. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
But I want you to specifically think about the abdomen and the oblique muscles that are going to help you during expiration. Like you can kind of even do that and feel those muscles contract. Because I need to also rewind for us to talk about running and cycling. I also placed balloon catheters in these individuals. So I had a pressure sensing balloon. We put it up the nasal passage, down the esophagus, and one into the stomach. That allowed us to approximate the pressure that those abdominal muscles were generating. And we had another one that sat in their esophagus to kind of get those rib cage muscles, how much pressure was being generated.
Interesting. Okay. So now, that's the measurement
and then
aspect
I had
of
people
things.
run and cycle.
Yes. Perfect. Okay. So now, so now you've got them all
they have
outfitted
all the markers
with like
and they have catheters in them. Yeah.
And they got balloons inside of them and other crazy stuff
so
like that.
We get volume and pressure. It's great.
That's okay. That's super cool. Okay. So what did you find differences between cyclists and runners then?
Yeah. The biggest thing is when you had someone running, there was almost no abdominal volume changes. And the reason why, they still generated a lot of pressure in their abdomen, but there was no volume changes. And the reason being is all those abdominal muscles had to become postural muscles for the trunk while you ran and hold the core in place.
Right.
Meanwhile, when I put someone on the bike, you could actively see in some of my really trained people, like these beautiful contractions of the muscles.
You can see that if you ever watch the Tour de France, if they're next to somebody,
they like unzip their jersey or something.
Yeah, and it looks like they're just like beer gut inside, and it's very impressive. And so I have noticed that before.
Very differently in cycling and running. So same person and everything, and big change there.
Did you notice so you said lots of pressure still, but in terms of volumes being moved, so that'd be tidal volume, right, per breath. Was it larger than in cycling, or were they about the same?
No, tidal volume is smaller during running with a higher frequency. So I had them for matched ventilation. So for the comparison is, hey, we'll have you at 100 liters per minute and 100 liters per minute. To achieve the same ventilation, runners were taking smaller breaths more frequently and then slightly larger breaths less frequently in cycling.
Okay, interesting. So
I should say tidal volume times frequency equals ventilation.
Yes. That is also something that I think a lot of people, I mean, even myself, right? You know, it's like at my exercise physiology course, we teach, Fick equation. Respiration is very similar in that sense, right? Cardiac output is very similar to
heart rate times, stroke volume equals cardiac output.
Yep.
You can also think of it as running speed as stride length times stride frequency.
Right.
It's all
yeah. So
frequencies times a set amount. Yeah.
Right. And then what you can do though is you can manipulate or try to target specifically, right? Like, are you targeting tidal volume? Are you targeting respiratory frequency, heart rate, so on and so forth. So yeah, really, really cool how there's all these parallels to all these different, rates and liters and, just volumes and other things like that.
I love the parallels.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So you're finding that in runners, it's higher breathing frequency, lower tidal volume. In cyclists, lower breathing frequency, higher tidal volume. And so this is something that has come up on the podcast numerous times for people who are very into the ventilation side of things.
Okay.
Is breathing more often, is breathing more often causing more oxygen consumption within the expiratory, inspiratory muscles that could then be stealing oxygen? So it would be the respiratory metabolic reflex, right? Stealing oxygen from the muscles while you're breathing. And does it make that big of is it that much of a difference?
Okay. So I kind of followed what you're saying. When I think about the metabolic reflex, I think about the respiratory muscles fatiguing.
Yep.
And the respiratory muscles are always going to get the oxygen, the blood they need, and they will steal that away from the legs. Whether breathing more frequently would actually stop the metabolic reflex, I'm not sure I buy that.
Oh, no. Increase because you're contracting more. So the more contraction that you're getting, the more demand. I think that's what I've heard as the idea.
I don't think so, because if anything, if you start contracting them more frequently, you're going to fatigue them faster. So you would only be accelerating the metabolic reflex.
Yes, that's what I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
then I agree with that.
Yes, okay. That's what I meant to say, is that more frequent contractions is going to lead to fatigue faster, which would then lead to acceleration of.
So
force is also in there too.
Before we speculate too far, I would also say a big thing with breathing is, and this goes also parallels for many other parts of the body, the principle of minimal effort. So the body will choose the path that's going to be most metabolically optimal.
Yep.
For a given condition. So my guess is whatever exercise intensity you've given the person, the breathing frequency and tidal volume they've chosen is the most metabolically optimal. And so trying to change the breathing to stop metabolic reflex, well, you're going to incur another metabolic cost there instead. So
yes, and that is why I wanted to ask you about this as kind of like a little bit more of like expert in economy, breathing, and other things like that, because that is a perfect point that I think people may be overlooking, is that anything you change in the system is going to have ramifications in other portions of the system. It's like it's like when people are like, oh well, I just nasal breathe all the time in order to keep my CO2 tolerance high, in order to change the Bohr effect. I was like, no, your body is going to balance everything out. So it's just because you think you're changing that doesn't mean you're necessarily changing what you think you're changing.
Yeah.
And somebody on the podcast also said, it's like physiology really never lies. And
like that.
Yeah, physiology never lies as long as you can measure it correctly, right? Yeah. So you have to understand then, what the ramifications, what the downstream ramifications are for changing something. So if I were to then change my breathing patterns from an acute perspective, there's going to be ramifications.
100%, yes.
From a training perspective, is there any evidence to say that actually doing respiratory muscle training is going to make our breathing more efficient, which could then spare over time, like the shunting of blood to the respiratory, inspiratory, expiratory muscles versus not? You didn't realize that this was going to be, like a...
that yet.
Okay.
No study has done that yet. I do like that idea. And that is possible, I think.
Yeah. And I think too, that's,
should I say if I know someone's doing that study? I don't know.
Yeah, no. I was just, you didn't realize that this was going to be a PhD defense all over again. I know. And I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just super interested in this right now because I've been talking to a lot of people, right? Like the breathing trainers and other things like that are on the market. And it's like, there's all these claims and there's these books that's like, change the way you breathe and, other things like that. So I want to get what your perspective of the actual data is. And, maybe it's like, what can we actually say and what can't we say that's supported by actual research? Because absolutely, I think that there is value to like kind of like the anecdotal, like, oh, well, I coach athletes and this has worked for X, Y, and Z athlete. But we always have to be skeptical of, is that shown across populations? And that's why the research is so important, right?
Yeah. I hate to speak to anything that we don't actually have data for.
Yeah.
But no, what I'm saying is what you're speculating, I think, is a good research question. Also, I can't find any negative impacts of someone doing respiratory muscle training, right? So you can do it. I can't think of any detrimental effects. Maybe an athlete's already too tired, but for the most part is either, you do get a benefit or you just wasted a bit of your time. So I'm not opposed to respiratory muscle training, but there's a lot less data out there than people realize.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was gathering because I was working with Dr. Andrew Sabuti, who's done some respiratory muscle training, especially for like high altitude, like racing and hypoxic sort of stuff. And I was like, man, I'm pretty sure he hasn't even published that data yet. So there can't be that much data that's actually out there, right? And if anything, it's mixed. But I also do think, right, I'm sure, just like with anything, we're going to have, in response to respiratory muscle training, we're going to have high responders, no non-responders, and negative responders, right? So like you said, and I like this because I think this is how I weigh what things to potentially implement, maybe experimental things, is like, what is the potential negative ramification for an individual? If there's none, and except just a little bit of a waste of time, I'm like, okay, we can give that a shot, right? But if it's like, well, if this person screws this up, they could potentially like stop their career. I'm like, I don't think that's not worth the risk, right?
Exactly. Yes, 100%. And you know what? I'm also a huge believer in the placebo effect. So if someone really thinks it's going to help them, then kind of just go for it. Yeah.
No, this psychology is such a strong. Plays such a strong role in our physiology, and we don't even understand it.
You shouldn't ask me what I think about RP or dyspnea.
Let's see. Yeah, well, actually, I do want. I do want to go down that road because I think that's also something that RP has gained a lot of popularity with coaches and athletes and stuff recently. So
it is useful. It is useful.
Yeah.
But I wanted to show it was not useful. So we brought in. Oh my gosh, I forgot. I think we brought in 24 individuals and we told them we were either giving them hypoxic gas or hyperoxic gas. And they cycled at 70% of their max. And we asked them RPE and their dyspnea. And dyspnea is just your rate of perceived breathing effort. And yes, when we told people they were in hyperoxia, they said breathing feels easier. And when we told them they're in hypoxia, they said it was harder. And I was like, yeah, you guys were actually in normoxia the whole time. Debriefing them at the end, like, sorry, like... This wasn't actually a study looking at hyperoxia or hypoxia. This was a placebo study.
Wow. That's so wild because and this is where the mind is a powerful thing. If you think that something you are doing is changing your physiology, whether it's for better or for worse, we can't write off what those effects actually are because they're not significant.
Yeah, people would get off the bike and they'd be like, oh, that was noticeably harder, and tell me these things. I'm like, okay, and just,
Yeah, it's the same thing with like the mask type when you're doing indirect calorimetry, like the ones with the mouthpiece and then the nose plugged.
Yeah,
and,
Hans Rudolph piece. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, like though, and then like the actual like breathing diaphragm that they have. I always felt like I noticed, it being harder to breathe. But then when I would get onto, like another device that didn't have like the one-way valves and was just like, just sampling my air, it felt like I was fine. Again, could have been placebo, could have been the fact that, maybe my respiratory muscles weren't actually that strong, so I couldn't overcome that. And then I was, working a little harder. But those are still questions that, seem to be not answered. Okay, so you were looking. So, are there any? Oh, let's talk about differences between men and women in terms of breathing mechanics, because this would be cool.
Okay. Yes. I don't even know where to start. So I've looked at optoelectronic plasmography. Sorry, that's that motion capture stuff I was talking about before.
Okay.
And along with the EMG literature, women do tend to use more of their upper rib cage muscles than men.
Interesting.
Men use more of their abdominal muscles to breathe compared to women at a range of intensities.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I have a lot of interest with, as you know from economy, is how much of that oxygen is actually going to the respiratory muscles for women and how much of it is going to the respiratory muscles for men, and does that differ?
Mm-hmm.
So I consider that to be the cost of breathing. And we know for untrained people that can look about like 10%. When you're at max, about 10% of that oxygen is going to the respiratory muscles.
Okay.
And then when you look at trained men and trained women, a greater fraction is going to go to the respiratory muscles for a woman than a man. So somewhere up to like 13% for a trained man, and then up to, 16, 17% for a trained woman.
Interesting. So 13% for a trained man, 16 to 17% for a trained woman. And women are
exact numbers now.
Yeah. And women are generally smaller, right? So their VO2 and have a little bit less lean muscle mass, more adipose tissue.
The other thing is women have smaller lungs and smaller airways, even if we match them for, same height, same sitting height. So even for the same torso length, a woman's lungs are smaller.
Okay.
Women's airways are smaller.
So where my brain is going here is I'm thinking about the energetic cost of exercise now. Mm-hmm. So there was a really cool paper that my master's advisor, Dr. Robert Jacobs, just published that was looking at the carbohydrate need to run a 2-hour marathon. And he looked at both men and women because he wanted to be like, okay, well, 2-hour marathon for both. Let's see what it would actually be. And what he showed is that the carbohydrate cost for females was actually much higher than males. And the reason is because exogenous carbohydrate intake, because women had smaller lean muscle mass, so they didn't have as much glycogen storage. But then I'm also wondering now is how potential breathing differences in cost of oxygen could also influence that. Because if you have a larger aerobic capacity in men and that would and less oxygen cost of breathing in men, then that would leave more oxygen to be able to get to the working muscle, which 100%. Then could potentially spare more of that carbohydrate until later.
I'm following you.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if from a physiological perspective, if then, that is another reason why women may potentially need to take more carbohydrates on during endurance efforts comparatively to men. But then we also have the influence of estrogen and how that shifts, muscle fiber type to be more oxidative and more so it's just crazy.
Okay, I had like several things there. Yeah, so the first thing is what you were saying is for given intensity, he was saying a man is able to oxidize more carbohydrates and a woman will use more fats.
That would be, I think, yes. I think for generally speaking, I think that's
your general idea. Yes. Okay.
Yes. However, but for the same exercise intensity, the cost of carbohydrates, like
the cost of carbohydrate
is higher for females because they're smaller body, exercising at probably a higher percentage of their VO2 max and other things like that. So higher carbohydrate cost for females compared to males.
It's always so fun comparing females and males because do we compare them at an absolute workload? Do we compare them at an absolute ventilation? Do we compare them at a relative ventilation or relative workload? There's so many different ways depending on what question you want to answer.
Yeah.
Oh man, I forgot what I was thinking. The other thing you kind of touched on is economy in a female and the change in estrogens and progesterone. So does economy actually change over the course of a menstrual cycle? And I would say I've seen literature going both ways on that.
Interesting.
Saying it can be higher during, the follicular phase, lower during it, higher during mid-luteal, lower. And so I'd say it's actually probably a bit of a wash. Some people say, with the increased ventilation during progesterone, we're going to have an increase, or, economy is going to get worse. More cost is going to go there. There's so many different things changing that the amount it probably changes is out of the scope that we can measure. So when people ask me, does economy change over the menstrual cycle, is one, the data's all over the place. I don't think we can actually answer it. And two, it's probably really small if it does.
Yeah, no, that's
but I don't know
great.
If that's what you were getting at when you went there.
No, sometimes my brain just likes to go on tangents trying to connect different things and all of that. So if anyone out there is actually listening to this and like you have some opinions or anything on it, let me know, DM me, and I'll get Shalaya on here or within that conversation as well, because this is the sort of stuff that I love about talking to people who have expertise in certain areas and then trying to connect the dots. And this is like what made me fall in love with academia in general was, having the conversations like, hey, I just read about this. How does this connect to here? How does this connect to here? Does it connect? Because there's so many things that you would think are inherently connected, but we actually don't have research to maybe support that connection. Yep. And it's, yeah, it's really interesting, and that's just like where my brain goes. And this has been a super, super exciting conversation. I've had a really good time talking to you about this.
Good, I'm glad.
So the last two things, if you wouldn't mind indulging me here. How can we improve our breathing mechanics, and would it even be necessary? I think we kind of touched on this. And then how can we improve running economy? And it's like, and we can. I think, we generally have good ideas of it, but I want it to come from the expert.
Okay.
How can you improve your breathing mechanics? That would be where to start.
Okay. So I think I kind of did give this one away. I wouldn't actually try to improve them. During exercise, your body's probably going to pick the correct way to breathe, and that's probably going to be the most metabolically optimal path. So I wouldn't try to change my breathing mechanics.
Okay.
Two, unless you want to make me link it to running economy, and you said, how can we improve running economy? Recently, I just had a paper come out where we changed the underband of a sports bra to increase how tight it was on a woman. And kind of our bigger finding was when we took a self-selected sports bra and we loosened it for a woman, we actually saw economy improve by about 1.2%. So a small magnitude, but that would have improved running running economy, and we also lowered the work of breathing. So I guess mechanics did improve in that sense.
Yep.
But nothing that I would tell a person to go actively do. Don't try to go breathe differently.
Yeah. That's super interesting.
Once again, it's like shoes, right? You put shoes on a person, you can change a bra. This is technology you can change acutely to change running economy.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. So that's a cool link. And then the last thing is, like, if individuals are interested in improving their running economy, what are the best ways to approach that?
So besides training and running a lot,
that would be my first answer.
Yeah, I know. Go run more. Normally adding in plyometrics if someone isn't doing something like that, something that can help change tendon stiffness or kind of that muscle, so you can actually store and return more energy. That will improve running economy. What else could do that?
I was going to say heavy strength training.
Yeah, strength training. Anything that would kind of be on that that change of that muscular property could do it.
Yeah.
Hills could do it. Even speed work intervals can do that too. If you increase your VO2 max, now for that given speed, your running economy is probably better.
Well, isn't there a conundrum though? That's like, generally people with very, very high VO2 maxes actually have worse running economies.
Yeah, you rarely see it in the same individual. Someone with a high VO2 max normally has like mediocre or poor running economy.
Okay.
Or if someone has I don't know, an okay VO2 max, normally I'm like, hey, look at your running economy. It's great.
Right.
You should feel good. We just don't talk about these numbers. So.
No, I know. And that's what's so fascinating about predictors of performance, right? It's not just VO2 max that makes your endurance performance. There's obviously a lot of, psychological factors and other factors like that. But from what we can tell, right, it's VO2 max, second threshold, and economy values. So you need to focus on improving all of those most likely to most optimize your endurance performance. And I will say, being a muscle physiologist and showing that muscle oxidative capacity, or your body's ability to deliver oxygen to the muscle, transport it over the capillaries and muscle into the mitochondria, and have your mitochondria use a lot of that muscle, is also an insane way of getting better performance.
When you look it down at that level, 100%, yes.
Yeah.
Like there's so many different stages of that cascade to look at too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, no, and that's what I love about this sort of stuff. Shalaya, thank you for coming on to the podcast
so much
and
for
everything.
Having me.
Yeah, this was so much fun. And if people want to get in touch with you or ask any more questions in terms of economy or breathing mechanics or anything like that, where can they reach you?
Yeah, I'm at Shalaya Kipp, and that's on Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah, and going forward, if it's okay with you, if I do breathing mechanics or sex-based differences or anything like that, I'll tag you in those, and then you can feel free to chime in on stuff if people are asking, answering questions, those sort of things. I would love to have your input on that sort of stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool. So as always, you guys can, if you have any questions or anything regarding this episode or any other episodes, you can find me at Critical02 on Instagram. And you can comment down below if you're on YouTube. And you can also leave comments and stuff on Spotify if you didn't know that. I can't actually respond to those on Spotify, but you can leave feedback for us and I can make the show even better. So, Shalaya, thanks again for coming on, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.